Professor Sioux McKenna, thank you very much for joining us. Firstly, an inspirational talk here at SAPI. I loved how you said, well, I'm here to talk about the future of higher education, but what do I know? Because while there are certain provocative questions we can lead, it's really difficult to tell what the future of higher education is, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so many forces that play out in higher education, global forces, and then your regulatory bodies, our policies at a national level. So I think there's so much that's beyond our control, those of us working in higher education. So the result of that is that I think sometimes people feel that they are just swayed by external forces, and so they fail perhaps to spend the time to think, what do they want the future of higher education to be, and what part might they play in seeing that happen?
How do we inspire them to have that conversation, to start answering that question for themselves?
I think higher education, most of us are so busy, so we rush from all our responsibilities, from meetings to lectures to assessment, and I don't think we have enough spaces in our institutions to have conversations about what are we here for? Who are our students? What do our students need? What are their responsibilities as citizens in the world? Are we nurturing appropriate sense of responsibility? So I think a lot of it is about time and finding spaces for the conversations that I think often are seemed as superfluous when we're just trying to get through the year, get through the syllabus, get the marks in the time. And so we neglect those bigger picture conversations, which I think are fundamental to us being able to do our jobs properly.
Also fundamental is collaboration. It's something you touched on quite early in your talk. And if we're going to get anywhere close to the objectives of 2030 and what we envision for our country, we'll need to see stronger collaborations between not only those in the private higher education space, but in the entire sector, including public, right? Absolutely.
And I think that part of the problem, in a way, of a kind of very neoliberal ideology that really overpowers many of our institutions is we are inclined to think of ourselves as individuals, trying to climb a ladder, trying to perform better. And we think of our institutions as simply being competitors with each other. And actually, if we don't collaborate, we're not going to be able to achieve those big, lofty goals. We're not going to be able to work for the system as a whole. When I say system, I mean the whole of society, for environmental issues, which are profound in our everyday lives now. Individual institutions, individual academics cannot address any of those. We have to be able to come together. So I think increasingly we've got to try and think beyond the kind of boundaries that we have put in place in a very competitive sector. It's also boundaries within our institutions. I think we often only work within our own disciplinary areas, within our own programs, and increasingly the sort of what they call the wicked problems of society and the environment require really transdisciplinary approaches. So I think we've got to invest in our students and in ourselves and understanding that we need multiple knowledges, multiple approaches. We've got to work together. Individually, we cannot deal with any of the big global problems that we're facing.
And how do we go about doing that in collaborations between the private higher education space and the public higher education space? The objectives are very different. Funding models are very different. Shareholders are very different. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, I think that that divide, though, both the privates and the publics, I think are coming to realize that we can do a lot more together. We can support each other in very interesting ways. We definitely have different stakeholders, different bottom lines, but we also do have a lot of shared ground. And often the resources that one sector might have, the other sector might not, and vice versa. So I think there's real opportunities to work together. And I think the quite simplistic understanding of the private higher education sector, which was definitely there in the early post-apartheid years, is being challenged. I think the private higher education sector, by and large, with a few scandals, but hey, that's not special to the private sector. We have enough of those in the public sector. But by and large, the private sector, I think, is sort of seeing itself perhaps in a far more robust, holistic way, encompassing all aspects of higher education, from teaching and learning, research, community engagement, and in ways that can really address broader society.
So if you were at the helm of any higher education institution, public or private, but let's focus perhaps on private. How do you develop the strategy for that entity, that organization, given some of the conversations we've had a few moments ago?
For your own organization or for a sort of collaborative?
Let's do both.
Okay. I think for your own institution, you can't individually, unless you're a dictator, come up with an idea of what the academic project for that institution should be. So it's about making spaces to have conversations, because too many of us are just busy working. It's amazing to me how many people have worked in academia for years but are unable to articulate the purposes of higher education. So I would make lots of spaces in my institution for conversations around that, including with students, including with support staff. And very importantly, I would try to open myself to conversations I disagreed with. And that's the challenge. If you really want to empower people, you've got to put up with the fact that they're going to have ideas that you don't like. And Salim Badat, who was Vice-Chancellor, he was the first CEO of CHE actually, and then he was Vice-Chancellor at Rhodes University. And I remember him saying that strong leaders surround themselves by people who disagree with them. And I think that's one of the things that's really important. If you want to make spaces for people to engage, you've got to allow for dissent, because that's at the heart of criticality. And then in terms of collaboration, I think one of the key things is to celebrate the collaborations where it happens, so that people don't think, oh, I'm working with someone in this other kind of institution, or as if there's something wrong with that, but rather to really make space to say, oh, there's this really interesting research project that includes 3 privates and 2 publics, and let me tell Senate about this project. For our leaders of our institutions to ensure that they are part of those higher level conversations. And it was really nice to hear earlier that the South African Private Higher Education Organization is working with Universities South Africa. I think it's though at that level that these collaborations are going to grow from strength to strength. And the bottom line is that the demand is far greater than the public higher education can address. And that's not just a demand for a qualification at a very instrumentalist level, but it's just a demand for intellectual spaces, a demand for possibilities of research. So I think the big divide of the past, it just can't hold. I think we have to find spaces of working together.